This system of economy that Walter Lippmann observed many years ago as an economy that has the capacity for a way of producing wealth in which the good fortune of others multiplies their own. This is the economic system which creates incentives that will give our people the opportunity to increase their personal wealth as well as the wealth of the nation. We need not share scarcity by redistributing wealth. We need to produce the wealth that creates the prosperity. Political parties are set up for many reasons, one of which are the many special interests in the country. But the only special interests which all of us must seek to protect is the interests of all the people in the land. The business interest, the labor interest, city and country, farmer and clerk. No group should struggle to divide the bounty, but by working shoulder to shoulder together, we can increase the commonwealth. I like to quote Woodrow Wilson in this regard. In 1912, he said, "To look at the politics of the day from the viewpoint of the laboring man is not to suggest that there is one view proper to him, another to the employer, another to the capitalist, another to the professional man, but merely that the life of the country as a whole may be looked at from various points of view and yet be viewed as a whole. The whole business of politics is to bring parties together upon a platform of accommodation and combination." Unquote. This is where partisanship must see the water's edge. The Democratic Party of today claims lineal descent from the first Republican Party and Jefferson as its founder. But they have diverged from the original Jeffersonianism. Jefferson, as I've said, believed in limited government, and he believed in the free exercise of religion. Listen to a part of his 1805 inaugural address. "I shall need, too, the favor of that being in whose hands we are, who led our forefathers as Israel of old from their native land, and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessities and comforts of life, who has covered our infancy with his providence, and our riper years with his wisdom and power, and to whose goodness I ask you to join with me in supplications, that he will so enlighten the minds of your servants, guide their counsels, and prosper their measures, that whatever they do shall result in your good, and shall secure to you the peace, friendship, and approbation of all nations." Most Democrats today simply do not adhere to the original Jeffersonianism. They are rather secular in their outlook and are for government doing much of what people can just as soon do for themselves. Jefferson was for small government. That government is best which governs least. Democrats don't seem to adhere to this anymore. They think government and not the people know best. This may be well intended, but it is not the government, the idea of government as envisioned and devised by our founding fathers, who wrote the Constitution, brimming with the ideas of checks and balances, separation of powers, enumerated powers, and free enterprise, and faith in our Judeo-Christian heritage. This is the basis of Republican philosophy today, and it is, I think, also very American. One of the flaws that Jefferson did see in the Constitution was its lack of a definite stopgap to congressional spending. We are beset with this problem today, and it is one of the reasons why I think we should have and must have a balanced budget amendment. For many decades, the nation has had a tax burden that increases as public spending increases. It has been to the credit of Presidents Kennedy and Reagan, and now Trump, that Americans are relieved from tax burdens from time to time by generous income tax reductions, although the current criticism of the current administration's tax reduction is that it favors too much of the wealthy and less of the middle class. But that may or may not be true. I don't know. I haven't really seen the hard facts of the matter. But it always seems that that's the basic response of the Democratic Party when a Republican cuts taxes, that it benefits the wealthy and not the rich. I mean, it benefits the wealthy and not the middle class. Well, here I'm a middle class person, and I'm a Republican. I wish I got a paycheck like those Republicans do, though. Well, elect me to Congress, and I will. Well, still, the government keeps spending money and going into debt, and it expects the American people to bail them out with each new tax increase. I believe the less tax increases, the more the government will take in as revenue, because instead of taxing the people, the people will have enough money to put into the economy, and over time this does two things. One, it creates incentive to work, which creates wealth. And second, it increases wealth from the government. It increases for both wealth from the government, for the government, and for the private sector. A government has the power to tax over and over to keep increasing revenue, that it never stops spending. This creates government debt. A debt is something that needs to be repaid, but the more the government spends without capping and paying the debt, the higher the debt and the less likely it will be repaid. The less likely it will be paid. The people have to keep giving the government more money by the taxes it imposes. If we cap spending, put a cap on spending, and then the government can repay the debt, but it will take time. So if we put a cap on spending, then the government over time can repay the debt. Now, if individuals and corporations adhere to this, spending within their means, that's a budget, shouldn't the government of the United States also do the same? In the American system of government, only two important tasks should face the government. First, the protection of the God-given rights of God-made man. And second, providing for and maintaining an alert national defense. Everything else can be done by the common enterprise of the people with limited government involvement. I firmly believe that the highest and best form of efficiency is the spontaneous cooperation of a free people. These are many of my thoughts on the matters that we have heretofore discussed, and I know I perhaps have repeated myself a time or two. The American political system surely did develop political parties in spite of itself, maybe because of itself. The American system developed parties. It is as natural as perhaps as what James Madison wrote in one of the Federalist Papers. Liberty is to faction as air is to fire. Political liberty encourages independent thinking and associations of people brought together to share common beliefs. This is in itself a blessing, for it is political liberty. We are free to think and speak as we see fit about anything that concerns us. We're not governed by the dictate of one, but the consensus of all. The decisions of our government are slow in coming, said Franklin Roosevelt. But once that decision is made, it is proclaimed not by the voice of any one man, but by the voice of 180 million. It is binding on us all, and the world is no longer left in doubt. You see, I like to quote FDR and other Democrats, not because they're Democrats, but because they are Americans. In recent years, however, a growing trend toward extreme partisanship has developed. I tend to theorize that this has evolved from the sad legacy of the Watergate scandal in the early 1970s, and going back to the divisions caused by the Vietnam War. It reasserted itself in the Clinton scandals. The parties attacked each other, saying that one or the other is to blame. Another factor to consider is that these two historical events, Vietnam and Watergate, did much to deteriorate the faith of the American people in the word of their government, their own government. I believe that if our politicians would be honest, persons of integrity, and selfless, we would not have half the scandals and the divisions that we have today. We would not have half the scandals that we've had, and the divisions would be less and certainly more tolerable, because they would perhaps not perdure as they do. They would be anomalies instead of regularities. We are today as divided as we were in the Great Slavery Debate, in the Civil War, and in the Vietnam War. It was at the height of the Vietnam War in 1968 when a Democrat, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, was running for president. 1968 was a tumultuous year, and unfortunately, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And I really believe that he could have been and was indeed a unifier of both party and nation at a time that really could have used his leadership. In his speech after winning the California and South Dakota primaries on June 4th, 1968, he really spoke, and that speech is a wonderful example of how a politician can express the hope and the need of coming together from all backgrounds, beliefs, and positions to form a unity of purpose. He said, What I think is quite clear is that we can work together in the last analysis, and that what has been going on within the United States over the period of the last 3 years, the divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society, the divisions, whether it's between blacks or whites, between the poor, the more affluent, or between age groups, or the war in Vietnam, that we can start to work together. We are a great country, an unselfish country, and a compassionate country. And I intend, he said, to make that my basis for running within the period of the next few months. Marvelous. But unfortunately, what is not so marvelous is that with the death of Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy before him, the Democratic Party again began a swing from center to farther left, because the leadership went to more liberal politicians, such as Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern. That's just my opinion. The nation elected a moderate Republican, Richard M. Nixon, to the presidency, and the nation turned a bit more right of center, but not too extreme. Then we suffered from his misjudgments that led to the Watergate scandal and his resignation and the further erosion of public trust. To his everlasting credit, Richard Nixon, President of the United States, did honorably end the United States' involvement in Vietnam, and he gave us peace with honor, as I think a President Robert Kennedy would have done so. I also believe that a President Robert Kennedy would have preserved us from scandal and kept the Democratic Party less liberal than it has become. Good people may differ on this matter. Edward M. Kennedy, the last of the Kennedy brothers, was in the Senate from 1962 to 2009, when he died, and the year he died. And when he died, but for all those years, he was a great champion of liberal causes, which I think are well intended, among which was a federally sponsored national health care. And he would always say, one of his lines in his speeches, one of his continuing themes would be, the size of the state of a family's health must never be determined by the size of a family's wealth. And as a general principle, I can agree to that. And you know how he capitalized on health care? Edward Kennedy did? Well, early in the 70s, early mid-70s, his son was sick in the hospital, and I think he had to have a leg amputated. And he could afford it, but he was sitting in the waiting room next to a couple from Massachusetts couple, and they were, the husband and wife were, mother and father were concerned about how they were going to pay for their son or daughter's medical procedure. And the senator overheard and went there to talk to him, and he listened to what they had to say, and he heard their concerns. And that was kind of like the beginning of his crusade for affordable health care. I think that's very, very good. Division and partisanship is a tragedy, but division and partisanship is a tragedy, because as long as we've had political parties in this country, our political history, for the most part, has had the happy and felicitous experience of both parties in modern times meet in the center of the political spectrum. Well, what has caused this divide in recent years? I've already answered the question. Government scandals, government and personal scandals of public officials, and yes, the political assassination of two of our most beloved leaders, who could and did lead toward the center, John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. This requires an effort to address, and it's done in no other way than by honesty in government and the integrity of our public officials. This can be done in a bipartisan approach, for unless we address this problem, the divisions will not but increase. The more scandals and dishonesty we will have in government, and the greater will be the partisan divide of blame and guilt. Nothing can make us more weak than political strife. Nothing can make us more strong than being a nation united in its commitment to freedom and in its willingness to do its duty. We can choose either divided we fall or united we stand. The President's appeal is that we govern not as two parties, but as one nation. In the 1980s, Republicans and Democrats could agree on general principles. Now it seems that a polarization of political thought has congealed into two irreconcilable camps. Indeed, in Springfield, Illinois, there is a big restaurant bar, where many officials go to relax. Well, they relax all right, but Republicans are on one table and Democrats at another table in a different location. I thought we ended segregation. Talk about a dysfunctional family. Well, we've got it in our state house in Illinois. I heard this from a friend of mine. It would only be too good to be true if he were mistaken. Our problems are of our own making, and so together we can undo them by solving them together. Across the gulfs and barriers that divide, let us not forget that there need not be permanent enemies. Let each group, citizen or party, decide their own path, so long as that choice does not threaten the political liberty of others. There are difficulties and divisions in our political life today, but as always, throughout our common history, there shines our basic unity. We all live in the same country. We all salute the same flag. We all pray to the same Heavenly Father God, and we are all Americans. Surely this bond of common patriotism can begin to teach us something. It was Jefferson Davis from Mississippi who tripped north to speak at Boston's Faneuil Hall, and he addressed his listeners as countrymen, brethren, and Democrats. Perhaps he as a Southern Democrat was appealing to his Northern Democrats. In any event, rivers of blood and years of darkness ensued. But those words of Jefferson Davis echo down through the years, and they teach us that as brothers and as countrymen, and only as brothers and as countrymen, can we hope to master and subdue the enormous forces that we hope to master, and that we can master and subdue the enormous forces which rage across the world, in which all of us live. And only in this unity can we pursue our personal talents to the limit of their possibility, in the service of our country and the American way. Tennyson wrote, "That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." In speaking these preceding thoughts, I have been drawing heavily from Robert Kennedy. He cited the Jefferson Davis quote in a speech he delivered to the students at the University of Mississippi on March 18, 1966. And these words of Tennyson are from an oft-quoted poem, Ulysses. I have believed these ideals for a long time. They have shaped and guided my thinking as a candidate, and, Lord willing and majority vote willing, as a congressman in the United States Congress. And hopefully, Lord willing, I will carry this philosophy into office. I believe this because I believe. I believe this because I believe in America. I believe in her people. I believe in our God and in our God-given destiny. What we must keep in mind in this time is that what we call conservatism today is or was in fact the classical liberalism that birthed our country, our great republic. The first political sovereignty of its kind in the history of the world. Our Declaration of Independence is the supreme example of the classical liberalism of which I speak. It was principally authored by Thomas Jefferson, with input from Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. Here again, its ringing phrases. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Herein is the American philosophy of government, and it can be found in no other source than the Declaration of Independence. Abraham Lincoln said at Independence Hall on his way to Washington to become president, he said, "I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence." Our founding fathers were its philosophers, who were sagacious to recognize God as the wellspring of our rights, not government, and further, that there is no absolute separation of God from state. It was no mistake or afterthought to inculcate within their philosophy of government and into our founding document the Judeo-Christian virtues of morality written on the sacred page of Scripture. Without religion, wrote Benjamin Rush, an American founder, there can be no virtue. And without virtue, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object of all republican government. This is the classical liberal thought of the 18th century, which is the conservatism today. What we call, or what is termed liberal today, is not grounded in the philosophy of our 18th century founding fathers, Jefferson and Madison, nor is it the thinking of their teachers and founders, Locke and Montesquieu. The liberalism today is the socialism that arose in the early and middle decades of the 19th century. It is from European thought, and thus is not American in either spirit or character. It came over from Europe as a philosophy. Socialism in America had its beginnings in the utopian communities of New England, Brook Farm in Massachusetts, and New Harmony in Indiana in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, in response to the social problems of the day: slavery, prisons, paupers, and insane asylums, women's suffrage, and temperance. American thinkers such as Emerson and Thoreau learned from European thinkers such as Comte Saint-Simon, Francois Fourier, and Robert Owen. These philosophers invented utopian socialism. This did not have much in common with Marxist militant socialism in Europe at the time. So this is how socialism developed in the United States. This is not evil in itself, but the socialism of Marx and European class warfare is a dangerous concept if applied here in the United States. Because here in the United States, we do not have a hierarchy of classes. Here, all men are created equal. There is equal opportunity for all to advance. This, unfortunately, was not perfect in our country at the beginning, as there were serious inequalities and injustices. But because America was born of the ideal of equality and liberty, our country was able to overcome its odds. Our whole history is the advance of liberty and equality for all of our people. It is the socialist dictatorships of the 20th century in Europe that is wholly out of place in America today. It is the socialist dictatorships of the 20th century in Europe that is wholly un-American and have no place here. This socialism is evil because it is a godless materialism, because it makes man the master of man and government the dictator of what is and what is not. Herein is the American divide today. I seriously think, and good people may differ, I seriously think that the Democratic Party today are intent on bringing America down this darkened path. In 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, who ran for president in 1928, and a one-time friend of Franklin Roosevelt, had a change of heart on liberalism. He began to see the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. Today, this is where the Democrats want to take us. I'm sorry, but that's just what I think. And again, good people may differ. If every American would once more recognize and accept their glorious and godly heritage of inalienable rights and self-government, the trend toward socialism would surcease, meaning stop. If this is the divide today, have we passed the point of no return with respect to compromise? Oh, to awaken from the nightmare of division and behold the glorious vision of America, of American unity, and the American way. The American's Creed, written by William Tyler Page in 1917, is worth reading, memorizing, and living. And I challenge each of you to find it, to read it, and to memorize it, and live it. Because in it we find the way to the American way. And this is the creed. This is the creed that crosses party lines. In fact, I want to recite it right now. Remember, I gave a speech about this several weeks ago. I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy within a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states. A perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of equality, justice, freedom, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes in sacred honor. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to respect its flag, to obey its laws, and to defend it against all enemies. Well, let me just regress real quickly. I believe in the American's creed because I believe this is the true America. I believe the American's creed because I believe in America, and I believe in her people, and I believe in our God and in our God-given destiny. I have faith in the future of the United States of America. The Republican Party today best represents the liberalism of America's founding fathers. The Democratic Party, that once great party, does not. In 1964, Barry Goldwater, senator from Arizona, ran as the Republican candidate for president against Lyndon Baines Johnson, the sitting president, who had a panacea of the Great Society in America. Norman Thomas, the six-time socialist candidate for president, was again running, and he said that if elected, Goldwater would end socialism in the United States, and that is precisely what he would have done had he become president and not Lyndon Johnson. Goldwater is famous for saying, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. If this sounds extreme, how about the Gulag and Soviet re-education camps? While there should be a more centrist path that still secures the inviolable rights and ideals of liberty and justice, free people must stop at nothing to defend liberty and justice in this country and everywhere in the world. While in 1964, Goldwater did not win, in 2016, Donald Trump did win, and he has said, America is not now, never was, and never will be a socialist state. Thank God for the United States of America on that one. I pray the divide in our country be bridged because it has brought us away from the center of both parties. The political center is weakened, and as a result, there is really no center anymore. What is perhaps more telling is that a New York Democrat said not too long ago that for his party in the upcoming 2020 election, he said, and I quote, centrists need not apply. This does not lend itself to closing the gap between our two parties. It widens the gap and increases the divisions. I hasten to warn us all that polarization away from a common center is a danger to our political life and liberty. Think of these thoughts from a poem written by William Butler Yeats 100 years ago in 1919, at the close of the First World War. He titled it The Second Coming. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Those lines were written 100 years ago. Polarization away from the center core is dangerous to our republic because it spawns impatience with political parties and breeds the formation of third, fourth, and fifth parties. And France, before de Gaulle, saw this. Germany, prior to Hitler's rise, saw this. And it happened also in Italy in the late 60s and early 70s. The fact is, multiple parties' doctrinaire and approach, incapable of commanding a majority to control either the legislative or executive branch in a federal system, or form a government in a parliamentary system, fail their government. This is inaction. And what do we see in our leadership today? Stalemate and inaction. Although some observers of politics say that the whole business of politics is to maintain the status quo. Well, I agree if the status quo is good and in not need of change or reform. But if it needs fixing, then fix it. I also believe if it's not broke, don't fix it. But this gridlock is the result of the problem of extreme partisanship. The result or partial result of this, is a growing number of independents in politics. In 1968, George Wallace ran as the American Independent ticket for president. 1968 was a very close election between Republican Richard Nixon and Democrat Hubert Humphrey. But with Wallace as an independent, he tipped the election for Nixon. Wallace, normally a Democrat, Southern Democrat, took votes away from Humphrey, who might have otherwise won. In 1992, the Perot third-party candidacy won it for Clinton and lost it for Bush 41st. President Clinton's personal and political scandals added to the mean-spiritedness of politics in America in the 1990s, climaxing in his impeachment and near ouster from office. And this event tightened the partisan vice immensely. What is the answer? It is to revitalize the two-party system in this country, to bring them back to a more centrist base. Recall the Watergate era. Gerald Ford was a Republican nominated to be the new vice president by a Republican president. He was confirmed with massive support from Democrats in both houses of Congress. Then Ford became president upon the resignation of Nixon. Ford was essentially elected in a bipartisan effort by a Republican president and a Democratic Congress. This, of course, was under unprecedented circumstances. Recall the Reagan era. We had a Republican president and a Democratic Congress with Democrat Thomas P. O'Neill as the Speaker of the House. The government served the needs of the time. There was progress made through the genius of the art of compromise. President Reagan called for a 30% reduction of taxes over a 3-year period, but he had to compromise with the liberals in Congress, so he got a 25% reduction in taxes over a 3-year period. But the end result was good, tax reduction. Recall how in 1964, both Republicans and Democrats worked to end the filibuster stall in the U.S. Senate and vote to pass the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Senator Hubert Humphrey, a Democrat of Minnesota, worked with Senator Everett Dirksen, Republican of Illinois, to achieve the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, eliminating racial segregation in public facilities. Recall when an $11.5 billion federal income tax was passed Congress, also in 1964, with the support of Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Recall another substantial tax cut for Americans was agreed to through compromise between a Democratic Congress and a Republican president, as mentioned just a moment ago. Recall the Federal Convention of 1787, when 55 men from divergent backgrounds and regions of the new nation got together and compromised, out of which came the very bulwark of our republic, our present Constitution of the United States. The miracle at Philadelphia is referred to by one historian. And Alexander Hamilton, of this great accomplishment, Alexander Hamilton observed, "For my own part, I sincerely esteem it a system which, without the finger of God, could never have been suggested or agreed upon by such a diversity of interests." The very genius of our system is based on the democratic method of compromise, by which each side receives something of which they desire by conceding a little to the other side of the argument. This is America's real opportunity to return centrism to government. We can have leadership which will attract the right of center and the left of center to come together in the American House. A house divided against itself cannot stand. This rings as true today as when Christ said it, as when Lincoln said it. Just before the divided states fell into civil war, President Lincoln lifted his eyes beyond the dangers of the moment to the time of healing yet to come. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave, from every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Yes, my countrymen, the better angels of our nature. May these better angels visit our nature once more, and then our President and Congress can use the power of their offices to put meaning in their words and power behind their actions. This is effected not by partisan campaigning, but from combined powers of party, combined legislative and executive cooperation to solve all of the crises that face the American people and their leaders. 56 years ago, on March 4th, 1913, Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated our 28th President of the United States. He was a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress behind him. The nation was poised to receive the most prodigious progressive reforms until the 1930s, and another Democrat, Franklin Roosevelt. In his inaugural address, Wilson assessed partisanship thus: the success of a party means little except when the nation is using that party for a large and definite purpose. This says to me that our political parties serve the immediate needs of the people of their time. At the conclusion of his inaugural, Wilson sounded forth the clarion call for an entire people to act as one nation. Here muster not the forces of party, but the forces of humanity. Men's hearts wait upon us, men's lives hang in the balance. Men's hopes call upon us to say what we will do. Who shall live up to the great trust? Who dares fail to try? I summon all honest, all patriotic, all forward-looking men to my side. God helping me, I will not fail them, if they will but counsel and sustain me. My fellow Americans, if we as American citizens today and as American statesmen today unite as honest, patriotic, forward-looking leaders and followers in the great cause of our common country, today as we did 56 years ago, then when the history book is written, 56 years hence, by the future historians, those who read of our acts, those who read of our actions and decisions, will close the book and rise up and call us blessed. My citizens, I thank you.